The docks of Southampton, England, 1848. 5 years after she was cast out. The salt wind cut across the harbor like a blade, sharp enough to sting but not sharp enough to numb. Eleanor Ashford stood at the ship's railing, her gloved hands gripping the worn wood as the English coastline emerged from the morning mist. Closer now, too close to turn back. 5 years. 5 years since she had been forced onto a ship in disgrace. Belly swollen with shame, pockets empty, heart shattered. 5 years later, the Duke of Greystone had stood silent as his mother condemned her, as the servants packed her single trunk, as the gates of Greystone Manor closed behind her like the doors of a tomb. Beside her, small and solemn, stood a boy of 4, dark curls that caught the light exactly as his father's once had. Eyes the color of winter storms. Ashford eyes, unmistakable, undeniable. Thomas clutched her skirt, watching the approaching shore with the quiet intensity of a child who had learned too young that the world was not safe. "Mama," he whispered, "is that where Papa lives?" The word Papa struck her like a physical blow. She had never called Nathaniel Ashford that name. To Thomas, he was a ghost, a story, a man who existed only in the careful silences Eleanor kept. "Yes, my love," she said, her voice steady though her heart hammered. "That is where he lives. But he doesn't know you exist. He doesn't know I'm coming. And when he sees you, when he sees what his silence has wrought, he will have no choice but to face what he abandoned." Eleanor had not come to beg. She had not come to plead for a place in his world. She had come because her son, their son, deserved a name that was not whispered in shame. Because the truth, no matter how brutal, was better than the lies that had nearly destroyed her. The ship's horn sounded. Thomas pressed closer against her legs. Eleanor lifted her chin, straightened her worn shawl, and prepared to walk back into the life that had cast her out. This time, she would not leave in silence. If you cherish stories of love earned through transformation, of courage found in the darkest hours, and of dukes brought to their knees by the truth they tried to bury, then stay with us. For this is a tale of reckoning, of redemption, and of a love that refused to die even when abandoned. 5 years earlier, London, 1843. Eleanor Ashford had been the Duchess of Greystone for barely 6 months when the world turned against her. She had been Eleanor Hartley before that, daughter of a country vicar, educated but without fortune, graceful but without connections. When Nathaniel Ashford, the Duke of Greystone, had chosen her during her single London season, society had whispered that she was beneath him, that his choice was reckless, that a woman of no standing could never truly belong in a house as ancient as Greystone. Eleanor had tried. God, how she had tried. She learned the names of every portrait in the gallery. She memorized the preferences of every servant. She studied the account books, the tenant rolls, the endless social obligations that came with her new title. She desperately wanted to be worthy of the man who had chosen her, the man whose rare smiles made her feel, for the first time in her life, that she was enough. But Nathaniel's mother, the Dowager Duchess Margaret Ashford, had never accepted the marriage. "My son married beneath him," she would say to her circle of titled friends, her voice carrying just far enough for Eleanor to hear. One cannot make silk from cotton, no matter how one tries. Still, Eleanor had hope, because in the quiet moments, in the library after dinner or in the garden at dawn, Nathaniel would take her hand and speak to her of his dreams, of modernizing the estate, of breaking free from the suffocating traditions that had ruled Greystone for generations. "You are the best choice I ever made," he told her once, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "The only choice that was truly mine." Eleanor had believed him, and then she discovered she was with child. The morning she told him, Nathaniel's face had transformed with joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. He had lifted her, spun her, laughed like a boy freed from lessons. "An heir," he'd breathed against her hair. "Eleanor, you've given me everything." But the Dowager Duchess did not celebrate. She must be sequestered, Margaret announced at dinner that very evening, her voice cold and clipped. "In her condition, she is too delicate for society. She will remain at Greystone while you attend to your duties in London." Nathaniel had hesitated, torn between his mother's authority and his wife's pleading gaze. "Mother, surely Eleanor can. The succession is too important to risk," Margaret cut in. "Would you gamble your heir on your wife's stubbornness?" And so Nathaniel left. He promised to return soon, promised to write every day, and promised that his absence would be brief. The letters did come at first warm, full of longing, counting down the days until his return. And then they stopped. Eleanor wrote frantically. She wrote of the baby's movements, of her fears, of the increasing coldness from the dowager, of the way the servants had begun to avoid her eyes. No response came. 3 months passed, then 4. Eleanor's belly swelled, and with it, a creeping dread. And then, one frostbitter morning in January, the dowager summoned her to the drawing room. Margaret Ashford sat like a queen passing judgment, a single letter in her hands. "My son has written," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "He has made his position clear." She held out the letter. Eleanor took it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was Nathaniel's. The words destroyed her. "Eleanor, I have had time to reflect on our situation. It has become clear to me that our marriage was a mistake born of youthful impulse. I cannot, in good conscience, tie myself to a woman who does not understand the duties and sacrifices required of this position. You will be provided passage to America and a small allowance. It is more than generous given the circumstances. Do not attempt to contact me. This chapter of my life is closed." Eleanor read it 3 times, the words blurring as tears fell unchecked. "No," she whispered. "No, he wouldn't. This isn't. My son has made his choice," Margaret said, rising. "You will leave Greystone by week's weekend. Quietly, without scandal. You will tell no one of your condition. The child, should it survive, will be raised abroad, far from England, far from this family's name. But I'm his wife. This is his child. You were in error in judgment. The marriage will be quietly annulled on grounds of your instability." The word dripped with disdain. "Nathaniel will marry properly next season. A woman of breeding who understands her place." Eleanor's world shattered. She clutched her swollen belly, protective and desperate. "Please," she begged, hating herself for it. "Please, just let me see him. Let me speak to him. There's been some mistake." "There is no mistake." Margaret's eyes were glacier cold. "Only a necessary correction. You have 3 days to pack. My solicitor will handle the arrangements. Cooperate and you will have enough to live simply. Resist and you will have nothing." 2 days later, Eleanor stood in the bitter cold of the London docks, a single trunk at her feet, a ticket to Boston in her hand, and nothing else. No farewell from Nathaniel. No explanation. No mercy. She watched England disappear into the fog, one hand pressed to her belly where their child grew, and she made a vow. One day she would return. One day, Nathaniel would see what his silence had cost. One day the truth would come to light, even if it took 5 years, even if it destroyed them both. Present day, Greystone Manor, 1848. Eleanor had forgotten how imposing Greystone Manor was. The carriage she had hired, with the last of her carefully hoarded money, rolled to a stop before the great stone facade. Ivy climbed the walls like grasping fingers. The windows reflected the gray sky, cold and watchful. Thomas pressed against her side. "It's very big, Mama." "Yes, darling. Very big. And very cold," she thought, just like the people inside. The driver unloaded her single worn trunk, the same one she had left with 5 years ago, now held together with rope and hope. Eleanor took Thomas's hand and walked toward the front entrance. She didn't go to the servant's door. She didn't send word ahead. She walked straight to the front door and knocked. The butler who answered, Porter, she remembered his name, went pale as death. "Lady Eleanor," he breathed. "But we thought." "I'm quite alive, Porter," Eleanor said calmly, "and I'm here to see my husband. His Grace is not receiving. His Grace will receive me." Eleanor stepped forward, and years of surviving alone in a foreign country had given her a spine of steel. Or I will stand in this doorway and explain to every passing servant exactly why the Duchess of Greystone disappeared 5 years ago. Porter's eyes dropped to Thomas, taking in the dark curls, the unmistakable aristocratic features, the age that told its own damning story. I will inform His Grace, he said weakly. Eleanor swept inside, Thomas clinging to her hand. The entrance hall was exactly as she remembered. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, the massive chandelier that had made her feel so small on her wedding day. She heard footsteps, multiple sets, voices raised in confusion, and then he appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Nathaniel Ashford, Duke of Greystone. 5 years had carved lines into his face. His dark hair had threads of silver now, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness, were the same. He stopped mid-step when he saw her. The color drained from his face. Eleanor, he whispered. The name seemed torn from his chest. How are you? Alive? She finished. Did you think I was dead, Your Grace? Or merely convenient to forget? Nathaniel descended the stairs slowly, as if approaching a ghost. His eyes moved from her face to the small boy at her side, and Eleanor watched understanding dawn with devastating slowness. No, Nathaniel breathed. No, that's not. You weren't. Oh, but I was. Eleanor's voice remained steady despite the hammering of her heart. 5 months gone when your mother had me thrown out like rubbish. But you knew that, didn't you? You read my letters. You knew and you did nothing. Letters. Nathaniel's voice cracked. Eleanor, I received no letters. I thought. Mother said you had left, that you wanted. Your son is 4 years old. Eleanor cut through his stammering. She placed her hand on Thomas's shoulder. His name is Thomas. He has your eyes, your stubborn chin, your way of thinking deeply about small things. He exists, Nathaniel. And you would have never known if I hadn't found the courage to cross an ocean and face you. The entrance hall was filled with servants, all frozen in shock. At the top of the stairs, a door opened. The Dowager Duchess Margaret Ashford emerged, her face a mask of cold fury. What is the meaning of this intrusion? She demanded. Porter, have this woman removed. This woman, Eleanor said, her voice ringing clear and strong, is the Duchess of Greystone, your son's legal wife, the mother of your grandson, and I will not be removed from my own home again. Nathaniel's hand went to his chest as if his heart had stopped. He stared at Thomas, truly looked at him, and Eleanor saw the moment recognition crash through denial. The child was undeniably his, a mirror, proof that could not be dismissed or hidden. Dear God, Nathaniel whispered. Dear God, what have I done? You stood silent, Eleanor said quietly, while your mother destroyed us both. The dowager began to descend, her face rigid. Nathaniel, this is clearly some scheme. Mother. Nathaniel's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the hall like a blade. What did you do? Margaret lifted her chin. I protected this family. What did you do? The roar echoed off marble and stone. Servants flinched. Margaret froze. Nathaniel's hands were shaking. The letters. She said she wrote letters. Where are they? Nathaniel, you must understand. Where are they? Eleanor had never heard such anguish in a human voice. Margaret's mask finally cracked. I did what was necessary. She was unsuitable. The marriage was a mistake. I protected you from a life of mediocrity. You took my wife. Nathaniel's voice broke completely. You took my child. You let me believe. He couldn't finish. He turned to Eleanor, and the devastation in his face was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment she almost pitied him. I didn't know, he said. Eleanor, I swear to you on everything holy, I didn't know. The last letter I received from you said you were well. Mother told me you had written asking for an annulment, that you found life here unbearable. She showed me a letter in your hand. Forged, Eleanor said flatly. I wrote to you every day for 2 months, begging you to come home, telling you about our child. I never received them. Nathaniel took a step toward her, hand outstretched, then stopped as if afraid she would vanish. Eleanor, I searched for you. When Mother said you'd left, I went to your father's parish. He said you'd gone abroad and wished no contact. I thought, God help me, I thought you truly wanted to be free of me. Your mother paid my father, Eleanor said. Enough to rebuild his church. Enough to buy his silence and cooperation. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Nathaniel turned slowly to face his mother. You paid her family to hide her from me. It wasn't a question. Margaret drew herself up. I did what any mother would do to protect her son from ruin. Ruin? Nathaniel's laugh was broken glass. You call my wife and child ruin? I call a fortune hunter who trapped you with a convenient pregnancy ruin. Yes. The slap of words echoed in the sudden silence. Thomas whimpered. Eleanor pulled him closer, her hand trembling with rage. I loved your son, she said, her voice low and deadly calm. I asked for nothing but the chance to be his wife, to build a life with him. And you destroyed it because I wasn't born with the right last name. You weren't worthy. Enough. Nathaniel's roar shook the chandelier. Mother, you will leave this house. Today. Within the hour. You will go to the dower house and you will stay there until I decide whether I can bear to look at you again without becoming ill. Margaret paled. Nathaniel, you cannot. I can. I am the Duke. This is my house. And you, madam, are no longer welcome in it. His voice dropped to something colder than ice. You have stolen 5 years of my son's life from me. 5 years I will never get back. The first words he ever spoke, I didn't hear. His first steps I didn't see. Every milestone, every moment gone. Because of your arrogance and your cruelty. He turned back to Eleanor and Thomas, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I cannot undo what has been done, he said softly. I cannot give you back those years. But Eleanor, I am begging you. His voice cracked. Please, don't leave again. Stay. Let me try to earn what I should have fought for 5 years ago. Eleanor looked at the man who had once been her entire world. The man whose silence had nearly destroyed her. The man who was now, finally, looking at her as though she mattered more than duty, more than status, more than his mother's approval. I didn't come here to reconcile, she said quietly. I came here to make sure my son knew his father, to claim what is rightfully his. Your name, your acknowledgement, nothing more. Then let me give him those things, Nathaniel said desperately. And while I do, let me prove that the man you married still exists, that he's worth knowing again. Thomas tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. Mama, is he really my papa? Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked down at her son. Her brave, beautiful boy who deserved so much more than the scraps she'd managed to give him. Yes, darling, he is. Can we stay? The question was simple. The answer was anything but. Eleanor met Nathaniel's gaze. I saw the desperation there, the regret, the dawning understanding of what his inaction had cost. We will stay, she said carefully. For now, in separate quarters. Thomas will know you, Nathaniel. But trust, that must be earned. And I promise you, it will not be easy. Nathaniel exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for 5 years. I will earn it, he said. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. The Dowager Duchess turned and swept from the hall, her spine rigid with fury and defeat. Eleanor stood in the entrance of Greystone Manor, her son's hand in hers, and felt the first fragile thread of possibility begin to weave itself through the ruins of her shattered life. This was not forgiveness. This was not love. But it was a beginning. And after 5 years of nothing, even a beginning felt like hope. Eleanor was given the Rose Suite, a collection of rooms on the 3rd floor that had once been hers when she first arrived as a bride. The servants had prepared them with obvious haste. Fresh linens hastily thrown over furniture. Fires lit in hearths that had been cold for years. I had them ready the nursery as well, Nathaniel said awkwardly, hovering in the doorway as Eleanor set down her single trunk. Next to your chambers, if that's acceptable. Thomas had already run to explore, his small footsteps echoing through rooms that seemed vast after their cramped Boston boarding house. "It's acceptable," Eleanor said carefully. Silence stretched between them, weighted with 5 years of absence and pain. "Eleanor," Nathaniel began, "I need you to understand. Not tonight." She cut him off gently but firmly. "Tonight I need to settle my son. The explanations, the apologies, the recriminations, they can wait." He nodded, looking lost in his own home. "Of course. I've had supper sent up. Whatever you need, just ring for Mrs. Holloway. She's the housekeeper now. Mrs. Barnaby retired." "I remember Mrs. Holloway," Eleanor said. "She was kind to me, before." The word before hung heavy between them. Nathaniel left, closing the door with careful softness, as if afraid any loud noise might shatter the fragile truce. Eleanor sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation drained away, leaving only bone-deep weariness. Thomas bounded back in, eyes wide. "Mama, there's a rocking horse, and toy soldiers, and a whole room just for me." "Yes, darling," she managed. It's very grand, isn't it? Is this really where we're going to live?" His voice was filled with wonder and uncertainty in equal measure. Eleanor pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of her son. "For a while, at least. We'll see how it goes." That night, she lay in a bed far softer than any she'd slept in for 5 years, listening to Thomas's peaceful breathing from the nursery, and tried to make sense of what she'd done. She had achieved her goal. Nathaniel knew Thomas existed. Their son would have his birthright, his name, his place in the world. But at what cost? To herself? To Thomas? To the careful, simple life they'd built in Boston where no one knew they were running from anything? Sleep came late and brought dreams of storm-gray eyes filled with regret. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Mrs. Holloway, a round, capable woman in her 50s, bustling about the sitting room with breakfast. "Oh, my lady, you're awake. I've brought tea and toast, and cook is preparing a proper breakfast for young Master Thomas." She paused, eyes glistening. "It's so good to have you home, my lady. So good." Eleanor felt tears prick her own eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. You were always kind." "What happened to you was a wicked thing," the housekeeper said bluntly. "Begging your pardon for speaking plainly, but it was. Some of us knew it wasn't right, but the dowager." She shook her head. "We're all glad she's gone to the dower house. The place feels lighter already." After breakfast, Thomas begged to explore the grounds. Eleanor agreed, needing air and distance from the walls that held so many painful memories. They were walking through the gardens. Overgrown now, she noticed, when Nathaniel appeared. He was dressed simply in shirt-sleeves and waistcoat, hair windblown, looking more like the man she'd married than the distant duke she'd confronted yesterday. "May I join you?" he asked hesitantly. Eleanor wanted to say no, wanted to keep her walls high and her heart protected. But Thomas piped up before she could answer. "Do you know where the stables are? Mama says there are horses." Nathaniel's face transformed. "Would you like to see them?" Thomas nodded eagerly. "There's a mare who just had a foal last month," Nathaniel said, crouching to Thomas's level. "She's gentle. If your mother agrees, perhaps you could visit them." Thomas turned pleading eyes to Eleanor. She sighed. "Very well, but stay close." They walked to the stables, Thomas between them, chattering about everything and nothing the way children do. Eleanor felt the surreal quality of the moment. Walking beside Nathaniel, their son between them, as if they were a family instead of strangers bound by legal contract and biological accident. In the stable, Thomas was entranced by the foal, a spindly-legged creature that nuzzled his palm looking for treats. "Careful," Nathaniel murmured, showing Thomas how to hold his hand flat. "Like this, see? So she doesn't mistake your fingers for carrots." The gentleness in his voice made Eleanor's chest ache. "He's good with children," she found herself saying. Nathaniel glanced at her. "I've thought about him. Every day since you left, I wondered if there might be a child out there somewhere. Part of me, But Mother was so certain you'd simply wanted to leave. And you believed her. Eleanor kept her voice neutral, but the words still stung. I did. Nathaniel straightened, putting distance between himself and Thomas, who was now attempting to count the foal's spots. I believed her because I was a coward, because it was easier to accept her version than to question why the woman I loved would suddenly want nothing to do with me. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. Don't what? Don't speak of love. Not now. Not when. She stopped, struggling for composure. You gave up too easily, Nathaniel. Whatever your mother told you, some part of you must have questioned it. I must have wondered if I really would abandon our marriage without a word. I did question it, he said quietly. Every day. But then your father confirmed it. Said you'd written to him, said you were happier abroad. And I. He ran a hand through his hair. I convinced myself that perhaps you'd realized you'd made a mistake, that marrying a duke was different than marrying a man, and you couldn't bear the difference. So you let me go. So I let you go, he agreed, his voice rough with self-recrimination. And it was the greatest mistake of my life. Thomas came running back, full of excitement about the foal. Mama, can we come back tomorrow? Please. Eleanor looked at her son's bright eyes and couldn't find it in herself to deny him this joy. We'll see, darling. As they walked back to the house, Thomas ran ahead, chasing a butterfly. Nathaniel spoke quietly. I know you have no reason to trust me, no reason to forgive. But Eleanor, I need to try to make this right. Not just for Thomas, but for us. For what we once had. What we had is gone, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. That girl who loved you died a little bit every day I spent alone in Boston. You can't resurrect her. Then let me know the woman she became, Nathaniel said. The woman is strong enough to survive alone in a foreign country. Strong enough to raise our son. Strong enough to come back here and face me. His eyes held hers. That woman is magnificent, and I would very much like the chance to earn her respect, if not her love. Eleanor looked away, afraid of what he might see in her eyes, because despite everything, despite the pain, the abandonment, the years of loneliness, some treacherous part of her still responded to him, still remembered the way his smile had once made her feel safe. Still wanted to believe that the man she'd loved might still exist beneath the guilt and regret. One day at a time, she said finally. That's all I can promise. One day at a time. Nathaniel nodded, and something in his expression eased, as if that small promise was more than he'd dared to hope for. That evening, Thomas insisted Nathaniel join them for dinner in Eleanor's private sitting room. It was awkward at first, the three of them around a small table, making careful conversation. But Thomas was fearless in the way only children can be. He asked 100 questions. Why did the Duke have such a big house? Did he have any toy soldiers when he was little? Could he really read? What was his favorite color? Nathaniel answered each question with patience and growing ease. And Eleanor, watching them, felt her carefully constructed walls begin to develop hairline cracks. After dinner, after Thomas had been tucked into bed, Nathaniel lingered in the doorway. Thank you, he said softly, for letting me be part of his evening. I know you didn't have to. Eleanor stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. He deserves to know his father. Whatever happened between us, that much is true. Eleanor. Nathaniel took a step into the room. What can I do? Tell me what you need, and I'll move heaven and earth to provide it. She turned to face him. I need time. I need to know that this isn't just guilt talking. That if I let my guard down, you won't disappear the moment your mother whispers poison in your ear again. She'll never have that power again, Nathaniel said fiercely. I swear it. Words are easy, Your Grace. Eleanor's voice was tired. Actions are harder. Show me. He nodded slowly. I will. Every day. For as long as it takes. After he left, Eleanor sat in the window seat, looking out over the dark gardens. She had meant what she said, trust would have to be earned. But as she climbed into bed that night, she couldn't deny the small, fragile seed of hope that had taken root despite her best efforts to prevent it. Perhaps, in time, they might find a way forward. Not back to what they were, that was impossible, but forward into something new, something neither of them could yet imagine. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of careful coexistence, of Thomas growing bolder, laughing more, running through the halls of Greystone with the freedom Eleanor had never been able to give him in their cramped Boston rooms. 3 weeks of Nathaniel showing up every morning without fail, asking Eleanor's permission before spending time with Thomas, teaching him to ride, reading him stories, listening with grave attention to 4-year-old philosophies about why horses were better than dogs and why the moon followed you when you walked. And 3 weeks of Eleanor's heart, despite every warning she gave it, began to thaw. She tried not to notice the way Nathaniel looked at Thomas, with such naked longing and regret it was almost painful to witness. Tried not to notice how he always asked her opinion, deferred to her judgment, never once presumed his rights as a duke superseded hers as a mother. Tried not to notice how, sometimes, she would catch him watching her with that same desperate hunger, as if she were water and he'd been dying of thirst for 5 years. "He's different," Mrs. Holloway said one afternoon as she helped Eleanor sort through the clothing that had been packed away when she'd been exiled. Most of it was hopelessly out of fashion now. "His Grace, I mean, since you've returned." He smiles again. Not the polite society smile, a real one. Eleanor folded a day dress carefully. "Guilt can be a powerful motivator. Begging your pardon, my lady, but it's not just guilt I see. It's—" The housekeeper paused, searching for words. It's like someone opened the curtains in a dark room. "He'd been living in the shadows, and didn't even realize it until you came back." Eleanor didn't respond. Couldn't respond to the tightness in her throat. That evening, Nathaniel asked if he might take Thomas to the village fair the next day. They were in the library, a room that had once been Eleanor's favorite refuge. She'd been reading while Thomas played with wooden blocks on the carpet. Nathaniel had joined them an hour ago, working at his desk in companionable silence. It had become routine these quiet evenings. A family that wasn't quite a family, but wasn't quite separate either. "A fair?" Thomas perked up immediately. "What's that?" "It's where people come together to celebrate," Nathaniel explained. "There are games and music, and usually someone selling candied apples and gingerbread." Thomas turned to Eleanor, eyes wide with hope. "Please, Mama, can we go?" Eleanor hesitated. Going to the village meant being seen, being acknowledged. The village would know she'd returned. Servants gossiped, and news traveled fast. But a public appearance with Nathaniel and Thomas would be a statement. "All 3 of us?" she asked carefully. Nathaniel met her gaze. "If you're willing, I want people to know that you're my wife, that Thomas is my son, that we are, God willing, rebuilding our family." The vulnerability in his voice undid something in Eleanor's chest. "All right," she said softly. "We'll go. Together." Nathaniel's face lit with such genuine joy that Thomas giggled. "Papa looks funny when he smiles that big," the boy observed. "Papa." When had Thomas started calling him that so naturally? The next afternoon, they rode to the village in an open carriage, a deliberate choice on Nathaniel's part. "Let them see us," he'd said. "Let them see that we're together." The fair was in full swing when they arrived. Bright bunting strung between buildings, the scent of roasting meat and sweet pastries filling the air, children running between the stalls shrieking with laughter. Thomas was entranced. Nathaniel bought him candied apples and a small wooden sword. They watched a puppet show together, played the ring toss game until Thomas won a small stuffed bear that he insisted on naming Greystone, after his new home. And through it all, Eleanor felt the eyes on them, the whispers, the shocked recognition. "Is that Lady Eleanor? But she left years ago. And the boy, good Lord, he's the very image. The Duke looks different, doesn't he? Younger somehow." Nathaniel either didn't notice or didn't care. He kept one hand lightly on Thomas's shoulder, guiding him through the crowds. And occasionally, so briefly Eleanor might have imagined it, his fingers would brush against hers. They were watching a juggler when Lady Caroline Ashton appeared, a woman Eleanor vaguely remembered from her first season. She'd been kind back then, had actually defended Eleanor's match with Nathaniel. "Your Grace," Lady Caroline curtsied to Nathaniel, then turned to Eleanor with genuine warmth. "Lady Eleanor, how wonderful to see you returned." "Thank you, Lady Caroline," Eleanor managed. "And this must be your son." Lady Caroline smiled at Thomas. "My goodness, he's quite the young gentleman." "This is Thomas," Nathaniel said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Our son." The deliberate emphasis on "our" sent ripples through the nearby crowd. Lady Caroline's eyes glistened. "He's beautiful. You both must be so proud." They spoke for a few more minutes before Lady Caroline excused herself. But her public acknowledgement had done something powerful. It gave others permission to approach, to offer congratulations, to welcome Eleanor back. Not everyone, of course. Some turned away with cold shoulders and whispered disapproval. But enough were kind that Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. Perhaps she wasn't as completely outcast as she'd feared. As they prepared to leave, Thomas tugging sleepily at Eleanor's hand, Nathaniel turned to her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for today, for letting me be part of this." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him. On the way he held Thomas's stuffed bear carefully so it wouldn't drag in the dirt. By the way, he'd spent the entire afternoon focused completely on making their son happy. "You're a good father," she said. "I can see that now." Nathaniel's breath caught. "I'm trying. God, Eleanor. I'm trying so hard not to fail him the way I failed you." "You didn't know." "I should have fought harder to know," he interrupted. "That's the truth I've had to face these past weeks. Yes, Mother manipulated. Yes, she lied. But I was too willing to believe, too weak to question. He stopped, struggling with the words. "Too afraid that you really had chosen to leave me. Because deep down, I never understood why you'd chosen me in the first place." Eleanor stared at him. "What? You were perfect," he said simply. "Kind, intelligent, genuine. And I was hollow, playing the role expected of me. When you loved me, I felt real for the first time. And when Mother said you'd left, part of me believed it because I'd always feared you'd eventually see through the performance to the emptiness beneath." "Nathaniel, that's why I let you go so easily," he continued. "Because I thought I deserved to lose you." Eleanor's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You weren't hollow. You were never hollow. You were kind and thoughtful, and you made me laugh. You listened when I spoke. You treated my opinions as if they mattered. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Then why didn't I fight for you?" His voice broke. "Why didn't I question, search, and demand answers? Because you were raised by a woman who taught you that obedience was love," Eleanor said gently. "And breaking free from that takes time, courage. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find the strength." They stood there in the golden afternoon light, Thomas dozing against Eleanor's shoulder, and something fundamental shifted between them. "I'm not the man I was," Nathaniel said. "Not anymore. The man who let you leave without fighting is gone. The man standing before you now would burn the world down before losing you again." Eleanor's breath hitched. "Nathaniel, I'm not asking you to love me," he said quickly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Eleanor, I need you to know. I love you. I never stopped. And every day I see you, every moment I spend with our son, I fall deeper. It's terrifying and hopeless, and I wouldn't change it for anything." Thomas stirred, mumbling something about gingerbread in his sleep. Eleanor touched Nathaniel's face, just for a moment. His eyes closed as if her touch were absolution. "One day at a time," she whispered. "We're getting there." When his eyes opened, they shone with desperate hope. They rode home in comfortable silence, Thomas asleep between them. And when Nathaniel's hand settled over hers on the seat, Eleanor didn't pull away. It was a small thing, but after 5 years of nothing, small things felt monumental. That night, after Thomas was in bed, Eleanor stood at her window and thought about the man Nathaniel had become. Not perfect, still carrying the scars of his failures, but trying, genuinely trying, to be better. And she thought about the woman she'd become, hardened by necessity, strengthened by survival, no longer willing to be small or silent or easy to dismiss. Perhaps they could never recover what they'd lost, but perhaps together they could build something stronger, something earned, rather than assumed, something worth fighting for. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by private messenger. Eleanor was in the morning room with Thomas, helping him practice his letters. He was a bright child, eager to learn, and she'd been teaching him herself in Boston. "Mama, does T for Thomas look like a cross?" he asked, frowning at his slate. "A bit," Eleanor smiled. "But crosses have shorter lines here." Mrs. Holloway rushed in, her face pale. "My lady, forgive the interruption, but His Grace requests your presence in the library immediately." Something in her tone made Eleanor's stomach clench. "What's wrong?" I think you should speak with His Grace, my lady." Eleanor settled Thomas with his tutor and hurried to the library. Nathaniel stood by the window, a letter crushed in his fist, his face ashen. "Nathaniel? What happened?" He turned, and the devastation in his eyes made her breath catch. "My mother," he said hoarsely. "She's petitioned the church courts to have our marriage annulled." The words didn't make sense at first. Eleanor shook her head, trying to understand. "She can't. We're legally married. Thomas is. She's claiming the marriage was never consummated during the first 6 months," Nathaniel said, each word clearly painful. "That I was forced into it under duress. That evidence exists that you left England while carrying another man's child." Eleanor felt the floor tilt. "That's insane. She was there. She knew I was pregnant with your—" "She has a doctor's testimony," Nathaniel cut in, voice shaking, "claiming he examined you in Boston and determined Thomas was born earlier than would be possible if I were the father." "What?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "I never saw any doctor except old Dr. Matthews, and he's been dead for 3 years. The testimony is forged. It has to be." Nathaniel's hands were shaking. "But Eleanor, if this goes before the church courts, if she presents this, they'll investigate. They'll question everyone. They'll examine Thomas's birth record, if we can even find it. And in the meantime, until it's resolved," horror washed over Eleanor, "they'll question Thomas's legitimacy." "Yes." Nathaniel looked sick. "And if they decide against us, even temporarily, he loses everything. His name, his inheritance, his place." Eleanor sank into a chair, mind racing. This was Margaret's revenge, vicious, calculated, designed to destroy not Nathaniel or Eleanor, but the innocent child caught between them. "She's doing this because you banished her," Eleanor said flatly, "because you chose us over her." "I don't care what her reasons are," Nathaniel said fiercely. "I will not let her do this. I will not let her take Thomas's birthright." "How do we stop it?" Nathaniel paced like a caged animal. "My solicitor says the best defense would be—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "What?" "Proof that our marriage was valid and consummated. Documentation that you were in England when Thomas was conceived. Witnesses who can testify to your pregnancy before you left." He met her eyes. "And a united front. If we appear separated, if there's any hint that our marriage is troubled, it strengthens her case." Eleanor understood immediately. "You want us to present as a reconciled couple." "I want," Nathaniel said carefully, "to protect our son, whatever that requires. Even if it means lying? Even if it means—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Eleanor, I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to consider whether there's any possibility that we could truly reconcile. Not for show, but genuinely." Eleanor stood, moving to the window. Outside, she could see Thomas playing with a new puppy Nathaniel had brought home yesterday. Her son was laughing, carefree, finally beginning to trust that this new life was real. "She'll take this from him," Eleanor whispered. "If we don't stop her, she'll make sure the world sees him as a bastard. He'll grow up with that shame." That question mark over everything he is. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. Not touching, but close. I won't let that happen. How? How do we fight this? We prove that you were here, that Thomas is mine, that our marriage was real. He hesitated. But Eleanor, there are letters. The ones my mother intercepted. I've had them searched for. They were locked in her private chambers. Eleanor's heart stuttered. You found them? Yes, all of them. Every letter you wrote, begging me to come home. Tell me about the pregnancy. Asking why I'd abandoned you. His voice cracked. Reading them, Eleanor. Reading them was the most painful thing I've ever endured. Knowing that you were suffering alone, while I believed you'd simply stopped caring. Can we use them? As evidence? My solicitor says yes. They're dated, in your hand, postmarked from here. They prove you were trying to reach me, that you didn't leave willingly. He paused. But they also reveal everything. The cruelty, the manipulation. It will become very public. Everyone will know what my mother did, what I failed to prevent. I don't care about public opinion, Eleanor said fiercely. I care about Thomas. Then we fight, Nathaniel said. Together. He offered his hand, not as a duke to a subject, but as a partner, an equal. Eleanor took it. Together, she agreed. The next days were a blur of meetings with solicitors, gathering evidence, preparing testimonies. Mrs. Holloway came forward with her account of seeing Eleanor pregnant before the exile. Porter testified that he'd been ordered by the Dowager to prevent any letters from reaching the Duke. Even Lady Caroline Ashton agreed to provide a statement supporting the marriage. But through it all, Margaret's accusation hung over them like a sword. Thomas sensed the tension. He became quieter, more clingy, asking repeatedly if they were going to leave again. No, darling, Eleanor promised. We're not leaving. But you're sad, Thomas said with the uncanny perception of children. And Papa looks angry all the time. Eleanor pulled him into her lap. Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with difficult things. But we're going to be all right. I promise. She hoped it wasn't a lie. 3 days before the church court hearing, Nathaniel found Eleanor in the gardens at dusk. She was sitting on a stone bench, staring at nothing. Eleanor, he approached carefully. Are you all right? I keep thinking about what happens if we lose, she said. If they decide against us. Thomas would grow up knowing the world thinks he's illegitimate, that his parents' marriage was a farce. How do we protect him from that pain? Nathaniel sat beside her. We won't lose. You can't know that. I can, he said firmly, because I have truth on my side, and I have something more powerful than my mother's lies. What? He turned to face her fully. You, Thomas, the future we could have if we're brave enough to fight for it. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so tired of fighting. I know. Nathaniel's hand covered hers. So let me fight for you this time. Let me be the one who stands strong while you rest. That's what partners do, Eleanor. They take turns carrying the weight. We're not partners, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. Aren't we? Nathaniel moved closer. We've been living as one for weeks now, raising our son together, making decisions together, supporting each other. What else is a partnership if not that? It's not. We're not. Eleanor struggled for words. This isn't real, Nathaniel. It's just necessity. Is it? His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Because it feels real to me. Every morning when I wake knowing you're here. Every evening when we sit together reading while Thomas plays. Every time you laugh at something I say, and I remember why I fell in love with you in the first place. Don't, Eleanor whispered. Don't what? Don't love you? He laughed softly. Too late. Years too late. Eleanor, I know I don't deserve you. I know the man I was with catastrophically failed you. But the man I'm becoming, the man you're helping me become, he would die before letting you or Thomas be hurt again. Eleanor closed her eyes. I can't. Nathaniel, I can't just forget. I'm not asking you to forget. he interrupted gently. I'm asking you to let me earn forgiveness, to give us a real chance. Not because of the court case, not because of Thomas, but because somewhere, buried under all the pain and anger and fear, there might still be something worth saving. Eleanor opened her eyes, looked at him, truly looked at him in the fading light. He was different. She could see it now. The man before her had steel in his spine that hadn't existed 5 years ago, had learned to stand up to his mother, had learned that love meant fighting, not yielding, had learned, perhaps, that Eleanor was worth fighting for. If we do this, she said slowly, if we truly try, Nathaniel, I need you to understand. I'm not the girl you married. I won't be docile or easy or willing to be small. Good, he said fiercely. I don't want you to be. The woman you've become. Strong, fierce, unbreakable. She's magnificent. And I count myself blessed beyond measure that she's even willing to consider giving me another chance. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. The wall she'd built so carefully, brick by painful brick, developing a fissure. One day at a time, she whispered. One day at a time, he agreed. And then, in the darkening garden, Nathaniel leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Eleanor didn't. Their lips met softly at first, a question, not a demand. Then deeper, as 5 years of longing and grief and desperate hope crashed over them both. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel pressed his forehead to hers. We're going to win, he said, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Eleanor allowed herself, for the first time, to hope he might be right. The church court hearing took place in the Archbishop's Hall in London, a cold, formal room that smelled of old books and older judgments. Eleanor sat beside Nathaniel, their hands clasped beneath the table where no one could see. Thomas had been left at Greystone with Mrs. Holloway, blissfully unaware that his entire future hung in the balance. The Dowager Duchess Margaret sat on the opposite side, her solicitor, a thin, severe man named Mr. Crenshaw, organizing papers with precise movements. She didn't look at Eleanor, didn't acknowledge Nathaniel. She sat like a queen in exile, radiating cold fury. The Archbishop's representative, Bishop Thornbury, entered. A man in his 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Your Grace, Lady Eleanor. He nodded to them. Lady Margaret, let us proceed with truth and justice as our guides. Mr. Crenshaw stood. Your Excellency, we are here to address the validity of the marriage between Nathaniel Ashford, Duke of Greystone, and Eleanor Hartley. Evidence suggests this union was entered into under false pretenses and that the child presented as their son is, in fact, illegitimate. He presented his case with clinical precision. The doctor's testimony claiming Thomas was born too early, the forged letter supposedly from Eleanor requesting dissolution of the marriage, witnesses who claimed they'd seen Eleanor with another man before she left England. All lies, all carefully constructed to cast doubt. When he finished, silence hung heavy in the room. Then Nathaniel's solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, a sharp-minded man who had been Eleanor's champion from the start, stood. Your Excellency, if I may address each of these accusations? Bishop Thornbury nodded. First, the doctor's testimony. Mr. Pemberton produced a document. Dr. James Wickham, the man who supposedly examined Lady Eleanor in Boston, died in 1843, 2 years before the birth he claims to have attended. This is his death certificate, verified by the Boston Registry. A murmur rippled through the room. Margaret's face remained impassive, but her solicitors went pale. Second, this letter supposedly from Lady Eleanor requesting annulment. Mr. Pemberton laid another document before the bishop. Here is a sample of her true handwriting, verified by multiple sources. A comparison reveals significant discrepancies. The slant, the formation of certain letters, the cadence of speech. This letter is a forgery. Mr. Crenshaw stood. Your Excellency, forgeries can be difficult to prove. Third, Mr. Pemberton continued smoothly, the witnesses who claim to have seen Lady Eleanor with another man. I have here sworn affidavits from every servant who worked at Greystone during the relevant period. All testify that Lady Eleanor never left the grounds alone, never received male visitors, and was, by all accounts, devoted to his grace. He paused, letting it sink in. And finally, Mr. Pemberton produced a thick stack of papers. 53 letters written by Lady Eleanor to her husband during her confinement. Letters that never reached him because they were intercepted by Lady Margaret. The bishop took the letters, reading several carefully. His expression grew grave. These are dated, postmarked from Greystone. He looked at Margaret. Lady Margaret, did you intercept correspondence between the Duke and his wife? Margaret lifted her chin. I acted in the best interests of the family. That is not what I asked. The bishop's voice was steel beneath velvet. Did you or did you not deliberately prevent married correspondents from communicating? A long pause. Then, I did. The admission fell like a stone. And did you arrange for Lady Eleanor's removal from Greystone while she was carrying the Duke's child? Margaret's jaw tightened. She was unsuitable. The marriage was a mistake. Answer the question, Lady Margaret. Yes. The word was barely above a whisper. Yes, I arranged for her departure. The bishop set down the letters. Then there is no case here. The marriage is valid. The child is legitimate. And Lady Margaret, you have committed a grievous sin. Not only against this young woman, but against your own son and grandson. He turned to Nathaniel and Eleanor. Your Grace, Lady Eleanor, I apologize that you have been subjected to this ordeal. The Church recognizes your marriage as valid and your son as your legitimate heir. This matter is concluded. The gavel came down. Eleanor felt Nathaniel's hand tighten around hers. Relief crashed over her so powerfully she thought she might faint. They'd won. Thomas was safe. As they stood to leave, Margaret blocked their path. Nathaniel, she said, her voice brittle. You cannot truly mean to choose her over your family. She is my family, Nathaniel said coldly. She and Thomas. You ceased to be so the moment you put your pride above their welfare. Margaret's composure finally cracked. I did everything for you. No. Nathaniel's voice was quiet but final. You did everything for yourself. For your vision of what our family should be. And in doing so, you destroyed what it actually was. He paused. You will have an allowance, a home, but you will not have access to my wife or my son. Not until you can genuinely understand the harm you've caused. If that day ever comes. He took Eleanor's hand and walked past his mother without looking back. Outside, in the cold London air, Eleanor finally let herself breathe. We won, she whispered. Thomas is safe. We won, Nathaniel agreed. Then he pulled her into his arms, right there on the courthouse steps, and held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I will never let anyone threaten you again, he said into her hair. Never. You have my word. Eleanor pulled back just enough to see his face. I believe you, and she did. Finally, fully, without reservation. The man holding her was not the one who had let her be cast out 5 years ago. This man had fought for her, had faced down his mother, the church, society itself to protect their family. This man had earned her trust. Take me home, she said. I want to see our son. Nathaniel's smile was like a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Home, he repeated. Yes, let's go home. The journey back to Greystone took hours. They traveled in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the countryside roll past. When they finally arrived, Thomas came running out, Mrs. Holloway chasing behind him apologetically. Mama, Papa, you're back. Nathaniel scooped him up, spinning him around. We're back, and we have good news. What news? You, Nathaniel said, pressing his forehead to his son's, are officially, legally, completely and totally my son, forever and ever. Thomas giggled. I was already your son, Papa. That's silly. Sometimes, Eleanor said softly, the most important truths need to be said out loud so everyone knows them. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Eleanor and Nathaniel stood together in the portrait gallery, the room where paintings of Greystone's dukes and duchesses stretched back centuries. There's an empty frame, Nathaniel said, pointing to a space clearly meant for his own portrait. The artist keeps asking when I'll sit for him. I kept putting it off, because... He trailed off. Because you didn't feel worthy of the role, Eleanor finished. Yes. He turned to her. But I'd like to have it painted now. And I'd like you beside me. Not behind, not separate. Beside me as my equal partner. As the Duchess you've always been. Eleanor looked at the portraits, generations of stern faces, women who had been ornaments rather than partners. I'll agree, she said. On one condition. Anything. In the portrait, I want to be holding Thomas. I want anyone who looks at it to know that I'm a mother first. That's my greatest accomplishment and my greatest joy. Nathaniel's eyes glistened. That, he said roughly, sounds perfect. He drew her close, and Eleanor let herself lean into him, finally allowing the last of her walls to crumble. I love you, Nathaniel whispered. I never stopped. But I love the woman you've become even more than I loved the girl you were. You're stronger than I ever was. Braver. And I am so damn grateful that you gave me another chance. Eleanor tilted her face up. I love you too. Terrified me to admit it, because loving you before hurt so much. But I do. I love the man you've become. Their kiss was deep and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, Nathaniel said, would you want to move into the Duke's chambers? With me? Or would you prefer to keep your rooms? Eleanor considered. The Rose Suite had been her refuge, her safe space. But Nathaniel had proven he was her safe space too. I'll move, she said. But I'm keeping my sitting room. Sometimes I'll need space that's just mine. Always, he promised. Anything you need, any boundary you set, I'll honor them all. Then yes, Eleanor said. I'll move. I'll be your wife. Properly. Truly. The hope that blazed in Nathaniel's eyes was worth every risk she was taking. They walked through the quiet halls of Greystone hand in hand, and Eleanor felt, for the first time in 5 years, that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because the title said so, not because society demanded it, but because she had chosen it, because Nathaniel had earned it. Because their love, tested and broken and painfully rebuilt, was finally beautifully real. Spring had come to Greystone. Eleanor stood in the gardens, now restored to their former glory under her direction, watching Thomas chase butterflies with his younger sister, Charlotte, toddling behind him on unsteady legs. Charlotte, born 9 months after Eleanor and Nathaniel's reconciliation, tangible proof of their renewed love. A daughter with Eleanor's brown eyes and Nathaniel's stubborn chin. Careful, Thomas, Eleanor called as her son climbed a tree with more enthusiasm than skill. Not too high. I'm fine, Mama, he called back. At 5, he was fearless and curious, and so loved it sometimes made Eleanor's chest ache. Arms wrapped around her from behind. Nathaniel rested his chin on her shoulder, watching their children play. She's fast, he observed as Charlotte stumbled after a bird. Takes after her mother. Stubborn, Eleanor corrected. Takes after her father. Nathaniel laughed. A sound that came easily now, no longer buried under duty and grief. The past year has been transformative. Eleanor had taken her place as Duchess not with timid uncertainty but with confident grace. She'd reorganized the household, established a school for the village children, and become beloved by tenants who remembered her kindness. Nathaniel had stepped fully into his role as Duke, not the distant, duty-bound figure his mother had demanded, but a man who cared for his people, who listened to his wife's counsel, who played with his children without concern for propriety. Margaret remained at the Dower House. She had written, once, a letter that might have been the beginning of an apology. Nathaniel had shown it to Eleanor. What do you think? He'd asked. Should I respond? Eleanor had considered carefully. She's your mother. If you want a relationship with her, I won't stand in the way. But Nathaniel, she doesn't get unfettered access to our children. Not until we're certain she's truly changed. He'd agreed, had written back with careful boundaries. Margaret had accepted them. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. perhaps never fully, but it was the possibility of peace. "I have something for you," Nathaniel said now, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. Eleanor turned in his arms. "It's not my birthday. Does a man need a reason to give his wife a gift?" He pressed it into her hands. "Open it." Inside was a delicate silver locket. Eleanor opened it to find two tiny portraits, Thomas on one side, Charlotte on the other. "So you can carry them with you always," Nathaniel said softly. "The way you carried Thomas alone for so long. Now you'll never have to carry anything alone again." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Nathaniel, I know I can never give you back those years," he continued. "The years I should have been there, should have supported you, should have fought for you. But Eleanor, every day forward, I'm going to make sure you know how precious you are, how strong, how loved." She kissed him, pouring 5 years of pain and healing and hard-won trust into it. When they pulled apart, Thomas was calling for them. "Mama, Papa, come see. There's a nest." They walked hand in hand to admire the tiny bird's nest Thomas had discovered, Charlotte babbling excitedly, though she clearly had no idea what the fuss was about. "Can we keep them?" Thomas asked. "The birds. Birds need to be free." "Darling," Eleanor said, "we can watch them, but they're not ours to keep." "Like how you came back," Thomas said with 5-year-old wisdom. "Grandmama tried to keep you away, but you came back because you wanted to, because you're free." Eleanor and Nathaniel exchanged glances. "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "Exactly like that." That evening, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Nathaniel sat in the library, their favorite room, the heart of their home. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "Coming back? Give me another chance." Eleanor looked at him, this man who had failed her and then spent every day since proving he could be better. "No," she said honestly. "It was hard. God, Nathaniel, rebuilding trust was the hardest thing I've ever done. But look what we've built." She gestured around them, at the home they'd made, the life they'd created, the love that had survived being tested by fire. "We're not the same people we were," she continued. "We can't be. Too much has happened. But I think we're better, stronger, more honest." "I love you more than I have words for," Nathaniel said. "You and Thomas and Charlotte, you're everything, my whole world." "I love you too," Eleanor said. "Not despite what we've been through, but because of it. Because you proved that love isn't just feeling. It's a choice, and you choose us every day." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the fire. Outside, spring rain began to fall, soft and cleansing, washing away the last traces of winter. Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been at 21, hopeful and naive and so desperate to be loved. That girl had been broken by the world's cruelty. But the woman she'd become, tempered by survival, strengthened by motherhood, empowered by her own resilience, that woman was unbreakable. And she had chosen to love again, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, because Nathaniel had earned it, because their family, imperfect, scarred, but fiercely devoted, was worth fighting for. "What are you thinking about?" Nathaniel asked. Eleanor smiled. "How far we've come, and how grateful I am that we found our way back to each other." "Not back," Nathaniel corrected gently. "Forward. We found our way forward, together." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Forward." And as rain fell on Greystone Manor, washing stones that had stood for centuries, Eleanor Ashford, Duchess of Greystone, felt truly at peace. She had been banished for bearing a duke's child. She had crossed an ocean alone and afraid. She had returned to face the man who abandoned her. And in doing so, she had discovered something more powerful than vengeance, more lasting than vindication. She had discovered that love, real love, wasn't about never falling. It was about choosing to rise together, again and again and again, for the rest of their lives.